life. This one is called frog dissection. There's another one called rat dissection. I actually was a biology teacher when I was teaching science, and I kind of think that real dissection is an important thing for students to experience. But not all students, and even quite a lot of science teachers that I've met, are not entirely comfortable doing real life dissections. And I would also kind of ask the question, is it really necessary for 15 or 30 frogs to lose their lives just so that my students get an experience of dissection? I'm not really sure that 30 frogs losing their life in the name of learning is necessarily a great thing. And then, there are lots of other apps. This one called The Living Lung actually allows students to visualise what's happening inside their body when they breathe. We can actually layer more or less detail onto this diagram. So if we want to look at the gas exchange that's happening at the alveoli, we can add an additional layer. We can even explore by pressing these buttons up here what happens as we change the breathing rate. And we'll see the lungs actually breathe more deeply and the rib cage moving a lot more. And things like this can really help students to visualise some of the processes that we're talking about in science. And then, moving on to chemistry, there are some fantastic apps that help students visualise. This one, I'm sure most of you recognise, called the Elements app. One of the first available for the iPad, and it provides some really great stimulus material. We use this with our middle school students as a starting point for actually creating a book about the periodic table of the elements. They used Book Creator and actually used this to grab screenshots and do research. And then some of you may have seen the Elements also now has a companion app called the Elements in Action, and this has got videos of pretty much every element that can be reacted, and lots of the reactions that they do are on a scale that would just be too big or too dangerous or too expensive to do in a classroom. When I did this reaction, sodium with water, in my classroom, I was allowed by my head of science to use, he used to describe it as smaller than a pea-sized piece of sodium. In this video, they actually use a lump of sodium like this, and it has a lot more visual impact for the students than my little smaller than pea-sized piece of sodium that I used to drop in a beaker of water. And then other things. When I was teaching science, I used to give my students in their first chemistry lesson a paper copy of the periodic table which they stuck into the front page of their books. This is a free app called Nova Elements, which gives way more kind of interactivity and detail than that paper worksheet that I gave the students. They can do, as you can see, research about different elements, and there's actually even in here, if you see the build button, we don't have time to look at it, but inside the build button, students can actually build the electronic structure of the different elements that they're looking at, and that really helps them to kind of visualise these very abstract processes and things we talk about often in science, like nucleuses and protons, neutrons and electrons. So they can actually see what the electronic structure looks like. And then kind of moving on, there are some really nice apps that bring elements of computer gaming into learning. This app is called Roller Coaster Physics. It's actually used by our IB Physics department because they had a module on the physics of roller coasters. And rather than actually doing lots of theoretical stuff, the students for homework went off and built their own roller coaster. Once you've built a roller coaster, you can actually ride your roller coaster, and as you can see, you get lots of information as you're riding the roller coaster about how potential energy is being transferred to kinetic energy, the speed that you're going, the g-force, the acceleration, and so all these kinds of things help to bring science to life for the students. And then I just wanted to mention one other app. This app actually was discovered by our students about 3 months before the teachers discovered it. And actually one of the teachers came to me, it's called Plague Inc. And it's basically a game. But actually one of the teachers came to me and said, the students, since we gave them iPads, they've discovered this game called Plague Inc. You need to ban it, because they're spending all of their lunchtime sat in the corridor playing this stupid game. And actually, I'm one of those people that when teachers particularly come and tell me to ban things, it's almost like a red flag to me. I really don't like banning things. So we sat down with the science department and we looked at actually what was involved in this game. And actually when we started to dissect and take apart the game, we discovered that there's all sorts of IB level kind of biology that the students need to know to be successful. If you've never seen the game, the idea is that you build a bacteria or a virus or a different kind of disease, and then you actually have to evolve your disease to try and kill the entire human population of the world. And you're only successful if you evolve your disease faster than the human population evolves medicines and vaccines to actually prevent the spread of your disease. And actually, once we sat and dissected it with the science department, we realised that there was a whole load of learning in here that actually matched up almost directly with the IB biology unit on health and disease. So again, rather than banning the game, it actually became central to an IB biology unit on health and disease, and the students actually used to get set this as homework by their IB biology teacher, go off and try and kill the entire human population, write about the experiences and what you had to do to evolve your disease in order to be successful. And, you know, things like this, actually, for me, it's kind of almost learning goals. Students think they're playing a game, but actually there's a whole load of learning going on at the same time. And the key to me as a teacher is we have to draw this learning out so that they understand what it is they've actually learned by playing the game. And it can really help to kind of cement those science concepts we're trying to teach. Now, I'm just going to touch on, I'm going to So I haven't gone mad, I just was told by the AV guy I need to count to 5 before I turn my iPad on. Otherwise the HDMI switch over gets very upset. So I have to find it the old-fashioned way. So I just wanted to show you this app called Human Body, because this was a real hit with our science teachers in the lower school, and it's a really, really nice app. One of the things that I like so much about it, teaching in a school in Norway, there's not a lot of writing in it, so actually it doesn't need to be localised into different languages. But what I can do with this app is I can layer on different parts of the human body. So we can look at, for example, the respiratory system. And you can probably see my little virtual Andrew is breathing away. If we want to, we can have a look at what's happening in the lungs during gas exchange. And we can also go back again. We can overlay different systems on top of each other, so we've got there the respiratory system and the circulatory system, so students can start to make the links between the different systems in the human body. We can also investigate what happens if we make virtual Andrew run. Just by moving the little feet down in the bottom corner, you can see my heart's beating a lot faster, blood's pumping a lot more quickly, and actually my lungs are filling up with a lot more oxygen. So that's a really lovely app. There's a lot more detail in there than I have time to show you today. So let's walk back for a second. So I really wanted to spend the rest of the time talking about really how we can pull all these things together. One of the things, as I mentioned, I see a lot is science teachers find all these great simulations, and then one of the things that certainly the science teachers I've worked with at the international school struggled with was actually pulling all this stuff together to really make a really meaningful learning journey for the students. am very passionate about how we can make science more of a voyage of discovery, kind of going back to that idea I mentioned at the very beginning, rather than us doing experiments that really just confirm what we already know as teachers, how we can actually make learning more of this voyage of discovery for students. And I think one of the keys that we found at school was finding real contexts that actually can help students with learning a science topic. So I've got here a concept that we actually use with our students. Heart disease is actually one of the major killers in the UK for both men and women. And yet, while a lot of people worry about dying from smoking, only 2% of the population of the UK are actually worried about dying from heart disease. So there's clearly an issue there that needs to be solved. And so we asked our students, how can we raise awareness about heart disease? How can we actually get people to understand it's a major killer and yet people don't worry about it? Now, that's a really big question. You know, the UK government have not solved that problem, and yet we're asking our students to come up with solutions. But actually that really challenges students to apply their understanding. You know, we can bring in all sorts of things to this, like we can look at blood, circulation, the heart, health and fitness, heart disease, and a whole host of other related topics. And there's a lot of things students need to know before they can start to answer that question. And that to me is one of the keys to this kind of approach. One of the things I want to get students to do is to ask questions. You know, by asking that, how can we raise awareness, there's all these things they need to know. And these were some of the questions that students came up with when we set this as a challenge. The great thing for me as a teacher is, you know, we've got all these great tools on the iPad that allow the students to discuss and kind of collaborate and work on mind maps and brainstorming. Things like iTunes U, I can build learning pathways for them with useful resources. Padlet, great web tool for actually getting a whole class to brainstorm these things, you know, and then apps like Mindly, fantastic mind mapping app. And actually what we found when we did this was we didn't need to tell the students which tools to use, we just got them starting discussing, and before we even said you need to start recording your ideas and recording the things you need to know, they had mind mapping apps open, Evernote open, and they were taking all these notes, and they were actively engaged in what we wanted them to do. Now, obviously, being a science teacher, one of the things that is really important to me is that we don't lose all the kind of traditional things that as science teachers are very important. You know, practical work and science investigations are kind of fundamental to being a scientist. And so, one of the things we looked at with the science department was to try and find some tools that actually allowed science teachers to bring in the things that they were already doing before we had iPads. This is a fantastic wireless microscope made by a company called Motic. This grey box on the top is a wireless camera. It actually generates its own wireless network, so any student with an iPad can connect to the camera on the microscope. So suddenly, me as a teacher, showing things like the structure of arteries, veins and capillaries at the front of the lesson, students can open an app and can be capturing screenshots as I'm talking about the structure of arteries, veins and capillaries. Now, Motic told me that we could connect 6 iPads to this. We actually had 20 iPads, a whole class of students connected to the one camera, capturing video and still images live from the camera. And then the teacher said, homework, I've just explained all this stuff to you. You've captured the images and the video you need to now go off and make your own explanation of the structure of arteries, veins and capillaries. And so suddenly, that passive video lesson where the teacher would be at the front actually doing all the hard work suddenly became this very interactive experience for the students. Some of the students, the first time we did it, thought all they had to do was sit and listen to the teacher. got a bit of a shock at the end of the lesson when the teacher said, well, you've got all these images, now you need to go off and make your own explanation. And then kind of moving on to science investigations, practical work is a really key part of the scientific process. And so actually getting students to do real investigations, I think, is a really important part of science. When we did this work, these were investigations that the students themselves came up with that they wanted to research in order to be able to try and answer the question about how we raise awareness of heart disease. So some of the students actually said, we want to look at whether there's a range of heart rates in our class, or does everyone have just about the same heart rate? Another great little box, this box made by Pasco, Bluetooth data logger. So you connect your iPad via Bluetooth to this box, and then there's all these great sensors that you can plug in. So we've got heart rate sensors here, the students hold on to these, can measure heart rate. So the students were able to take this box and an iPad and go off and measure the heart rate of all these different students in the year group and come back and say, well actually yeah, there is a big range of heart rates in the year group. Other students said, well we want to see if there's a relationship between breathing rate and heart rate. Fantastic. And we've got a spirometer here that we can use to do investigations around breathing rate and exercise. Does heart rate, if I hold on, I can't do both because I'm a man, I can't multitask, but if I could be breathing and measuring my heart rate at the same time, and then really complicate things by doing some exercise, and then I'm starting to do real life investigation work. Now, I don't have time in kind of the 20 minutes I've been given to do a full demo of that, but Pasco are literally about 50 yards down there, and in fact, Eric, who is their Norwegian distributor, is hiding here at the front, so do feel free to kind of go and talk to Pasco. Their stuff is really, really good because it's, I think, designed for the classroom. And also they have this amazing range of sensors, so pretty much anything that you want to do in terms of investigation work, you can do, from measuring things like heart rate through to measuring things like the quality of water. Now, again, I just wanted to kind of pull all this together in the last couple of minutes. So from that big question that we asked at the beginning, we've suddenly got all sorts of opportunities to really start to use the iPad in a really meaningful way in the classroom. So, we've got tools like Shobi which allow me to share all the work between students. We talked about these great simulations that there are that actually allow the students to visualise the processes and systems in their body. When we actually did this project with students, they came up with all sorts of different ways that they wanted to present what they found out. So we had students making digital books, pulling together all the research and science investigations they'd done. Other students used tools like Explain Everything to make little videos explaining some of the processes going on. We had students that went out and made videos about keeping healthy and exercise, and actually then embedded those into their digital books, and then other students actually pulled it all together in a presentation. That for me is a really nice thing, because we're actually at a point where we can give the students these tools, and actually for me as a teacher it's quite nice when I don't get 30 copies of what is basically the same work handed in. I get, maybe 3 or 4 digital books, a couple of videos. So for me as a teacher it's much more interesting to assess their understanding and their learning by giving them a bit of freedom. And then also tools like the SmartView app for the data logging, numbers, all those tools great for research and evaluation. And you're probably wondering what this funny circle is in the middle. This is some educational theory, and I'm not in the last minute and a half going to go too deeply into this. But one of the things that I think I've hopefully highlighted for you in the last 20 minutes is I really think we're getting to a very exciting place in terms of education. When I was at school teaching, I had plastic models, and I think I got a PC laptop in the 3rd year of teaching, but it didn't have any of the kind of tools that I've shown you in the last 20 minutes of. And so, I mean, I had a great pedagogical approach with the students, but the content that I needed to bring science to life for them really wasn't available. And I kind of think we're now getting to this place in the centre where actually, if you can come up with the right pedagogical approach, which hope I've given you some ideas about, you know, we're at a place where the technology is providing some amazing content, and actually we've got all the tools we really need to bring science to life for the student. But it's not about one thing. You know, the iPad will not make science a really meaningful experience for your students. You on your own probably won't make science the most meaningful experience it can be on its own. Actually, it's when we bring all these things together that we have these really powerful ways to actually bring science to life for the students. I'm going to finish there. I'll be around at the end if you want to come and have a look or talk to me about any of the bits of equipment. As I say, Pascal are just down there if you want a more detailed demonstration of what you can do with the data logging. Thank you all very much for listening. Obviously my email address is there if anyone wants to get in touch with me afterwards. Thank you very much.